Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, first I want to thank you for coming out. I'm Eileen Shapiro. I am your Summit County Executive, and I have with me our prosecutor, who will be talking later. Introduce yourself.
Elliot Kolkovich. Good morning.
Good morning. Our Sheriff, Candy.
Hi, I'm Candy Fathery. I'm your Summit County Sheriff. Thank you all for coming this morning.
And Christine Hyam, who is your, I'll let you do it.
Summit County Councilperson representing District 6.
So she's your local representative. I want to thank you all for coming out. We are trying to do these in all 31 of our communities. Summit County is the 4th largest county in the state of Ohio. We know that we have an aging population, and we believe it is really important we get this information out to you and ask you when you leave here, if it's of value to you, to please share it with your neighbors, your friends, or your colleagues, because it will get more complicated instead of less complicated.
Well, thank you for being here. I'm certainly pleased to be here with you this morning. My name is David Frattare. I serve as the statewide commander of an organization known as the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. And we are run under the direction of the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office in Cleveland. And we serve the entire state in terms of the online exploitation of children. So I'm going to do my best in this short time that we have together to really talk about some of the problems that we are seeing, some of the concerns that we have. All of you have technology, all of you have smartphones, and so it's incumbent upon us, it's important that we understand some of the dangers out there. I certainly recognize that most children have had positive experiences on the internet as they've gone from those early days of using a device to learning social media to using it for schooling. But unfortunately, we see the bad side of the internet. We deal with nothing but child sexual abuse material and online child exploitation. So what I really want you to do today is come away with a better understanding of some of the dangers that exist out there. We do a lot of good work. We are an extremely busy task force. As I said, unfortunately, our whole entire focus is online exploitation and child sexual abuse material. We've been around since 2000. The Department of Justice early on recognized that internet crimes against children would be a problem. And so they reached out to a number of local, state, and county partners and developed this ICAC Task Force structure that exists today. So 3,700 arrests, 14,000 investigations. I mean, you can see the numbers up here, really just indicating that there is a lot of concern and there are a lot of issues that are out there on the internet in general when we talk about online child exploitation. The graph that you see here, it represents what we call cyber tips. So as a task force head for the state of Ohio, we get all of the cyber tips that come into us from an organization known as the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. That's the same center that you know from the work that they do with missing children. And so on the other side of the house, they have an exploited children's division. And these cyber tips represent incidents of child sexual abuse and online child exploitation. I started working for the prosecutor's office in 2009, in a year when we got 649 cyber tips. As it stands now, we get about 649 cyber tips every few weeks here in the state of Ohio. And you can see from this graph really just this upward trajectory as more children have come online, more offenders are using the internet. Social media in general continues to grow and technology becomes more commonplace. And for the last 11 or so years, it was a really gradual increase in the numbers that we were seeing until we got to 2020. And we had a very significant jump in March of 2020, which coincided with the COVID pandemic, where kids were suddenly forced to go home for school. Offenders started using their computers 24 hours a day because they were working remotely. And it created this perfect storm that you see here now where last year alone we crested 21,500 tips. And we're on pace this year to see that number go well above the 21,000 mark. As I said, more individuals continue to use social media. Most of the tips, and I'll talk a little bit later about where these tips are coming from, but most of them are social media generated. Social media companies are required to report terms of service violations, and so those make up the majority of some of the issues that we are seeing. The tips are broken down also into different categories, and you can see those represented up here. Far and away, child pornography, and we're trying to move from that term because of what it implies, but the reality is it's the online abuse, the exploitation of children. That category alone represents the vast majority of tips that we are receiving. So whereas before our concerns were about children connecting with strangers, online offenders, that has kind of given way to the idea that offenders are interested in material. They're interested in content. They recognize what the internet can do in terms of wanting to obtain material. And so they're using social media, they're using the dark web, they're using video game platforms, all the things that we're going to talk about to obtain this information in these files. The other big category that you see up here, online enticement of children for sexual acts, that's a significant number in the sense that just in the last few years we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of children who are being enticed online. This 86 or 860,000 number, it represents the number of tips that have come into the National Center since the program was created in the early 2000s. In December of 2023, this number sat at about 490,000. So we've seen an almost doubling of this number just in the last 10 to 11 months. And that's concerning. We're seeing that because of sexting. We're seeing that because of sextortion. And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like here in a second. But as I said, far and away, 193 million tips that deal with child sexual abuse material, child exploitation content. These two rooms right here, they represent the most dangerous rooms in your house. As a parent or a grandparent, we see the majority of the problems that we are dealing with in the bedrooms and the bathrooms of our children and our grandchildren. Two rooms that have locks, two rooms that offer some privacy, and far and away kids are telling, my own kids told me this one time, hey, I need a phone as an alarm clock. I need to be able to use my device in my bedroom. I see kids all the time who are taking selfies in the mirrors of their bathrooms, and oftentimes that's leading to exploitation and enticement as well. So while I understand that kids need privacy when it comes to the technology and their use of the technology, these two rooms create a lot of issues when we talk about the ability for kids to go online in a matter of seconds and to do something or to begin communicating with somebody that will then create problems for them down the road. So how do we prepare for this problem? I want you to ask yourself a few questions if you would. Do you know where your kids are online? Okay. I understand that at a certain point your kids are going to come to you, your grandkids are going to say, I want a phone, I want to get on social media, and that's fine, right? I don't expect that parents or grandparents are going to keep their children away from social media until they're adults. But I want you to know where they are. If they are on Instagram, I want you to be on Instagram. If they have a device, a tablet, a phone, a video game system, I want you to know where they spend their time and where they hang out. Do you know what they're posting? Okay? Social media is a wide open world. It offers a lot of opportunities, both good and bad. But what are they putting online? Again, it's not enough to just let your children, your grandchildren have social media without knowing what they're putting online and then ultimately how it's going to affect them. I think the big thing and the reason that we're here today also is understanding the technology better. I would love it if we could go back to the good old flip phones of yesteryear. That's just not going to happen, and we're seeing this rapid increase in the types of technology and what is available not only to kids and grandkids but also adults and seniors who are embracing this information as well. So it's important to understand the technology. If you're someone who doesn't want to give up that flip phone, who likes the convenience or simplicity of a phone, understand that today's smartphones are very powerful in terms of what they allow from a communication standpoint from a content standpoint. And it's important that we as adults, as seniors, try and kind of shrink that gap, if you will, that exists with today's youth. Do you have access, right? And what I mean by that is, do you have access to the device? Do you have access to these accounts? As parents, grandparents, again, allow your children some latitude and some ease to use social media, but you need to have access to it as well. That's understanding or knowing the password, the fingerprint, the pattern. I tell parents all the time that it's important to have that device locked down, because God forbid the child loses it and it's out there and anyone can access it. I want it to be password protected. I want there to be facial recognition, biometrics, patterns. But you probably paid for the device. You probably pay for the cell phone plan. So you have as much access to that device as your child, and that's important if something happens. There's a fallacy that if you provide your device or your child's device to law enforcement, that we can get into it in a matter of seconds, and that's just not true anymore. Phone companies, providers are making it very difficult, as they should, so it's important that you understand or know what that password is when you need it, if you need it. And then also, who else has access, right? The big issue for us, and one of the main things that we talk about with every presentation or outreach effort that we do, is who has access to your children through social media, through the device that they have, through the video games that they're playing. Everything online nowadays is centered around this idea that individuals, offenders, individuals who are looking to do things to your children that are nefarious or illegal, they can grab that access through these devices, through these social media accounts. And it's extremely easy in terms of friending kids, connecting with children. And so it's important that you understand that there are other people that are going to have access to your children, and to do what you can to limit those. So the other important part of this too is understanding what kids and what is popular and what's being used. So I want you to think of this like an eye chart, right? When you go to your eye doctor, they ask you to read the letters, and they get more difficult as you go down the chart, right? So most of the parents, grandparents that we talk to, I mean, they have no issues with understanding what the top row is, okay? Most everyone that's an adult has Facebook, but at the same time, when we ask the kids why they don't have Facebook, they say it's for old people. And that's really the reality of where we're going as we transition from, say, a Facebook to an Instagram, and then an Instagram to X, or Instagram to Snapchat and TikTok. And we've seen kids, young adults, move from certain platforms because they're not as popular as they used to be, or because more parents are getting online, and they want some privacy in a sense. They want freedom to, be who they are and do what they want to do. But oftentimes that leads to issues when parents say, I don't want to have Snapchat. I don't want to understand TikTok. But the reason that these apps are up here is because they represent the biggest problems for us when we talk about the cyber tips, when we talk about the information that we are receiving. Google, Microsoft, right? Amazon Photos. We're seeing individuals who are using Amazon Photos to traffic in child exploitation material. We're seeing gaming sites like Roblox. We're seeing private messaging apps like Kik. You've got cloud storage like Dropbox or OneDrive, Google Drive, where users can store materials privately and then share it as they see fit. Even apps like Pinterest, where we know it for a place for people to be creative and post things they've done. Individuals are using that as well to traffic in this exploitation material and continue to exploit children. WhatsApp, Reddit, you've got some of these at the bottom that are lesser known, but Badu, Meet Me, you've got 2 gaming platforms here, Discord and Twitch, and then you've got an image hosting service known as Imgur. And all of these allow for communication. All of these allow for content creation. And so that's really where it's at, right? It's not that these are dangerous in the sense if used correctly, but kids and offenders have recognized that there are certain features that allow them to do things that parents may not know about, grandparents may not be aware of, or may not want to use in any sense. And so a lot of times we tell parents, go on your child's device, every so often look at some of the apps that are there. And parents will say, well, I don't know what that yellow square with the white ghost is. And that's really where the power of the internet comes into play, right? Because I can simply in Google say, what is the yellow square with the white ghost? And Google will tell me that that is the Snapchat logo. And one of the best resources that you have as parents or grandparents is the idea that you could go to the App Store and you could learn about that app without having to download it, without having to use it. Now, at some point, I want you to use these if your kids or your grandkids are using them. But we don't read enough about what Snapchat is, or the data safety, or the permissions that these apps give to our devices. Okay? These apps function the way they do because of the algorithms, because of the permissions that you give them. And much like the terms of service on a website that we don't read, you're really opening your device up to a lot of data and a lot of different algorithms that allow it to operate correctly. So, again, you can do this with really any of these applications here. You can just describe it in Google or in Bing, and it will give you a pretty good idea of what it does, what it's capable of. Do the research, educate yourself a little more, and that's going to go a long way. And so you saw those logos, you saw those applications. I indicated that they were part of the problem when we talk about this, right? And big tech understands that it's about making money. Okay, we don't want to believe that the very thing we turn to every day for comfort and for fun is also creating this exploitation environment for our children. So these are our numbers from last year, from 2023, in terms of the tips that we are seeing, right? And parents ask me all the time, where do I need to keep my kids away from? And they'd like me to say adult sites. They'd like me to talk about the dark web. But the reality is it's these apps right here that we are seeing the most exploitation and online enticement, okay? It used to be Facebook and Instagram. That's decreased over the years. They still submit the most tips worldwide. But here in Ohio, it's about Snapchat. It's about Twitter. It's about Google, which encompasses not only Google search, but also Google Drive, Google Photos, and then the YouTube platform falls under those Google tips as well. Gaming sites like Discord, you have TikTok in here as well. And then, as I mentioned earlier, even Reddit, Facebook, some of these other sites that you see there also. Okay, offenders recognize how easy it is to exploit children and find children on a lot of these popular social media applications. It's hard to see at the bottom there, but Apple's down there with 5 tips that they submitted in 2023. That number 5 is accurate. Okay, the largest tech company in the world has decided that they're not going to submit cyber tips, even though there is a congressional mandate. Okay, and it's not that Apple is that safe. It's that Apple prides themselves on user privacy over the exploitation of children. So we've got a lot of work to do with some of these companies before they recognize the requirements they have to really keep their platforms as safe as possible. And so when I started in this environment back in 2004, I spent 5 years undercover as a 13-year-old girl. And we made a lot of good cases. We had a lot of good success. We really started to understand how powerful the internet was, where we could communicate with somebody on a fictitious profile and they would immediately travel believing that they were going to have sex with a minor child. And so we still see in this category here, there are a number of offenders who want to engage in sexual activity. They want to meet real children. Thankfully, we've turned a corner where most kids understand that meeting strangers from the internet is a very bad idea, and we've seen a decrease in that area. Where we've seen this increase, and I mentioned it in terms of the tips, is this idea of content or child exploitation material. Offenders of the old days used to realize that they needed to find real children. They needed to abuse those children and then memorialize that activity in the form of a photograph or a video. And now they recognize that they can just turn to the internet to do that. Okay, they need to find someone on social media. They need to start a communication with someone. And that's so very easy in this day and age where social media says, have as many friends as possible. Post as much content as you can. And so we are seeing today's youth desensitized to the idea of taking nude photos, sending nude photos, sharing that material with people that they don't know. And our offenders recognize that. Our offenders recognize that if they find a willing participant, that they can then exploit that child for material that they can then use for their own gratification or to pass around. And we'll talk about how that comes even more concerning when we get to this idea of sextortion. The number that you see here, this 400 million, represents the number of images and videos of children involved in sexual activity or sexual situations that are possessed by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Every time we find material that depicts a child in a sexual situation or being exploited, we're going to send that material to the National Center because we want to try and identify as many children as possible. There are hundreds of thousands of images and videos floating around the internet right now of children who've not been identified. And so as much as it is a mission for us to arrest and prosecute offenders, it's also more important for us to identify these victims, to try and remove this material from the internet. I think this number really speaks to the heart of the problem in terms of how much work we have to do to continue to try and identify victims, but also convince today's youth that posting this material online is a bad idea and leads to further victimization. And driving that problem is this idea that sexting has become very commonplace. If you do a search of the word sexting, and this was a few years back, but you're going to see a lot of articles about how to do it, what it is, how commonplace and mainstream it has become. I'm not surprised that results 1 and 2 come from Cosmopolitan or Glamour. You can't go anywhere now without seeing some sort of sexualized or sensualized photo that we see on the internet or magazines or on some of the movies and TV shows that we watch nowadays. What is shocking to me is that result number 3 was sexting, what it is and how to do it safely from WebMD. Okay, so one of the largest medical websites, if you will, is basically telling you how to do it safe. Now, obviously, they're gearing that article toward adults, but if I'm let's say I'm a 6th grader and I learn about the word, as most kids are going to do nowadays, they're going to come home and they're going to Google something, right? And if this is the article that they're finding, in their head, they're hearing that it's okay to do it, that there are ways to do it safely, and that's just not the reality of today's day and age. We talk to a lot of adults who are pleading with us to try and help them get their material off the internet of an adult nature because somebody found it, because somebody attempted to expose them to it. The kids that we're talking to in the schools have said to me point blank, I don't see the problem with this. Everyone does it, it's just something we do. Boys and girls who've said, well, what if we don't show our face? Okay. These photos and videos are going to come back around. They're going to pop back up. They're going to have an effect on that digital footprint that these kids have laid out. And it may not be right away, but more often than not, it's when they are going and looking for colleges, or they're going to pursue an athletic scholarship, or even down the road when they are trying to find work as a career, and then suddenly they're affected by something that they did 5, 10, 15 years ago. Kids understand that the internet is big, but they also believe that it's somewhat anonymous in the sense that no one's ever going to figure out what they're doing. And obviously we're seeing that that's not the reality. The other issue that we're starting to see, and this is one of these issues that I really don't have a lot of solutions for right now, because artificial intelligence is coming at us at such a fast rate. And obviously, there are a lot of positives to AI. It's helping us work better, work smarter. It's helping us process data better. But what we've started to see also is the idea that artificial intelligence can be used to create nude material, okay? And you see some examples up here where apps and sites nowadays allow you to upload a photo of your child or even a photo of you, and then that photo can be turned into a nude photo within 5 to 7 seconds, based on the power of artificial intelligence. And what's concerning about this is the reality that we've told kids for a long time, don't post illegal material, don't take nude photos. But with AI, an offender could take a fully clothed photo of a child or even an adult and then run it through an AI generator that will then create a nude photo. And that photo is then going to be used to exploit or entice or make the child believe that they did take this photo and that they should pay money. And we'll talk about sextortion and that horrible epidemic as well. But if we've at least gotten kids away from taking photos themselves, now they have to worry about the innocent content they post, the normal photos that they take. Because we know sites like Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook are all about posting content, telling people what you're doing. I did a news story about a year ago when AI first started to come out as a problem, and the reporter asked me, well, how do we prevent this from happening? And I immediately said, well, we don't post anything on the internet ever again. And I realized the minute I said it that that was not the solution. We're not going to stop people from putting stuff on Facebook. We're not going to stop people from posting on Instagram or sharing their content wherever they see fit. But we need to recognize the capability of today's artificial intelligence. When our kids come to us and say, this photo was not me, somebody created this, that we're going to then try and take some steps to be able to help them out. The other issue is this idea of connection, right? Social media companies will tell you that the more friends you have, the better your social media is going to operate, the better the algorithms are going to operate. You're now getting friends recommended to you by the friends that you already have on social media. So a lot of times it's who you connect with that is the problem, okay? My main issue with social media is not that it's dangerous or bad across the board, but that it's dangerous because of who you are connecting to. We are telling young kids, if you have 10 friends in real life and those are your 10 friends on social media, you're gonna have a pretty positive experience. But I've talked to girls who've said, I have 1,000 friends, 2,000 friends, and they've only had social media for a very short time. And that leads me to the next question of, do you know who those people are? Do you know who you are connecting with, okay? And we're starting to see more problems with the random text messages, the random phone calls. We're seeing kids who are answering those text messages, who are engaging in communications, who are being sent links that are leading them to questionable material, viruses, further scams, further extortion attempts. And so we're telling kids, don't answer that phone. Don't answer that text message, right? I have a hard enough time getting my own kids to pick up my phone call when I call them. I don't want them answering the phone from a number that they don't recognize or engaging in a text conversation because they're bored with some random phone number that they get here, all right? Companies like Apple are making it just as easy as well with the AirDrop function, right? Recent updates allow you to bring your phones together with somebody to share material and to make connections as well. And then the one thing that I think a lot of folks don't recognize is really the idea of data that you don't realize that you're sharing, okay? This example that you see over here on the left, this is the data that's created when I take a photo, okay? So my daughter and her boyfriend were putting a gingerbread house together last November, and so I took a photo of them. You don't see their faces, you don't see a background in the sense of you'd know where this photo was taken if you just looked at the photo, okay? But if you go into the details of the photo, and if you look in your gallery someday, you'll find the details or the info tab. And all of this data that you see here is basically publicly available to somebody if I send this photo to them, all right? And so file name, date and time, I mean, again, not a big deal. But here's the make and model of my phone that took the picture. Here's some basic information about, like some photography information about the exposure, the aperture setting, the size of the photo, okay? Again, not a big deal there. But down at the bottom, you see this location, right? And that location, and I blacked out my actual address, but that's my full address right there. And the phone knows that because my location services are turned on. I'm sharing that, what we call EXIF data, with whoever I send this photo to, right? And so think for a second that this photo is of an inappropriate nature. And it doesn't show the child's face, but the child sends it to someone that they're talking to online, right? That offender could open that photo in a reader program and learn that child's address instantaneously and be able to go visit their house, be able to further, exploit them if they then say, well, hey, I don't live far from your address. Okay. Thankfully, from a social media standpoint, companies like Meta, when you post something to Facebook or Instagram, they're going to strip that data out of that photo because they recognize that it is a security concern that could lead to further problems down the road. But if you send this in a text message or in an email, that data may still exist on there as well. And that's what further creates that connection issue that we are used to seeing. The other issue is, in the last few years, we've gone to this live environment. Everyone wants to be live, everyone wants to stream. And so apps have gotten on board with that. We saw Facebook Live for a while. We saw there was an app called Periscope that tied in with Twitter if you wanted to broadcast things live as well. But sometimes it's more simple than that, right? It's this idea that with a few clicks of a button, we can broadcast our lives out to the world, or at least attempt to. And we're seeing an alarming trend with younger kids as young as 5, 6, 7 years of age, especially in the YouTube environment, where they've been given a tablet by a parent or a grandparent. The adult believes that the child is watching videos with that, and then not realizing that simply by clicking, this is an example from a mobile device, but you click on the plus sign in the middle of the YouTube app, and then you're presented with the idea to create something, okay? And so essentially within 2 clicks, I'm gonna go live, right? I'm gonna broadcast my bedroom or what I'm doing on a certain day. And we usually, once or twice a week, at least in Cuyahoga County, we're going out and we're talking to parents about what their young children have been doing on the internet. And it's a very eye-opening conversation for us and for these adults because 99% of the time they have no idea that this is going on. They readily admit that they've given their tablet to their young child. That tablet is always signed into the adult account. And so when we get notified of a situation, it comes to us as though the adult is responsible. And we recognize immediately that it is the child doing something that they shouldn't, but it then requires us to go out and have that conversation, take time away from our formal investigations to basically advise the parent and the child that they're doing something they shouldn't. So the reality is that it should not be this easy for young children to basically broadcast the entirety of their lives or their private moments out onto the internet. And I'm thankful at the very least that Google and the YouTube platform are doing a lot of good in that area where they're notifying us before these videos are actually hitting the internet. But again, it goes back to my earlier statement that it should not be this easy from a tech standpoint for children to put themselves in harm's way. And so we're constantly talking to adults and to caregivers about the reality of really understanding what these apps are capable of. Because parents and grandparents seem to be horrified when we go and show them a photo of their child, or we show them the interior of their house that was being broadcast to the masses. And you saw some of our problems earlier were from gaming, okay? And we got a lot of gamers out there. We've got a lot of young boys who like the idea of gaming. Gaming has come a long way from when I was a young child, where you played a game with your best friend and they sat in the same room with you. That a 2-player game meant that 2 people sat next to each other and played on the same screen. But now with Roblox and Minecraft and Among Us and Fortnite and pretty much every game out there allows you to communicate with some other player. And usually that player is anonymous to you. They could be down the street or around the world. And kids oftentimes lose sight of the fact that even though these characters are cute and creative and they look harmless, that couldn't be further from the truth, right? Because who is hiding behind these characters as they play the game somewhere else? Offenders recognize that it's a great starting point for their exploitation if they meet children where they're most comfortable in these gaming rooms or these gaming platforms. Years ago, my son got an Xbox and I hear him talking one day. And I go downstairs and realize he's got his headset on and he's talking to 15 or 16 other players in this multiplayer environment that he's in. And I listened to him for a while, and he didn't say anything that was concerning. He didn't give out any kind of personal information, but I said, where are these people from? And he goes, I don't know. He goes, one's my buddy, he's at his house, but the rest of them are just people that we got hooked up with in this gaming channel. And I think a lot of times, and we've seen this with some investigations, where kids start out a game and then they provide an email to a user. They provide a screen name, they provide a phone number. Because the offender says, hey, let's talk after the game ends on a more private platform. And that's really what's happening. Gaming is not really where the exploitation happens, but rather it's a starting point for the offender to establish that relationship and then groom that child later on, say in a private messaging part of Snapchat or Instagram Direct, or they'll take them to a private messaging site where some of our concerns start to manifest themselves. So how do we prevent all this, right? I mean, the big issue is I've thrown a lot of horrible things at you. I've painted a very grim picture of the internet. But there are 3 things that we can do to prevent these problems, right? And these are my 3 Ps for you. The first one is privacy. Okay, as I said earlier, social media is not necessarily bad, although in my opinion, if we could go back in time and uninvent it, I think it would do us a lot of good. But use the privacy settings, use the privacy features, right? Talk to your kids, your grandkids about the need to be private, not only with the settings that they have available to them, but also with what they're posting and what they're sharing and how forthcoming they are, as well as us sometimes as adults, how much information we really put out on the internet. The other thing is power, right? And I've told kids for years the best tool they have in terms of their devices is that power button, okay? I don't turn my device off a lot. I make the screen go dark when I'm not using it, but like, when's the last time you or your kids really powered down your device, took a break from it? Kids oftentimes get into situations that they don't think they can get out of, and the reality is all they need to do is turn the device off, okay? Power it down, close the laptop screen, turn off the game, right? My son tells me that you can't turn off the game in the middle of it, but I tell him all the time, the world's not gonna end if you do, okay? And sometimes that's the best way to get out of a situation. And then the big one, right, is just be a parent, okay? Too often, parents, grandparents give their kid the latest and greatest technology and say, good luck, here you go. And then decide at that point that they're not going to be a parent. They're not going to set some rules. They're not going to understand the technology as well, right? I want to afford my kids all the opportunities they can. I understand that the internet connects them in good ways as well as bad ways, but it also requires us to have some rules and conversations and a little bit of education that we can use to keep our kids and our grandkids safe. And really what we're doing it for is a kid by the name of James Woods. James was a 17-year-old Streetsboro high school student in November of 2022 when he began an online conversation with a female, what he thought was a female, on Instagram. And within the course of 10 minutes, James sent a nude photo to what he thought was this female. And this female reciprocated. She said, if you send me a nude photo, I will send you one back. And like many of the 14 to 17-year-old boys that we deal with, James saw no issue with that. He took a full body photo, it showed his face, it was a completely nude photo, and he sent it off to what he thought was this other 17-year-old female that he met on Instagram. And for the next 20 hours then, James spent that time haggling and pleading with his offender, who basically said, I'm not a 17-year-old girl. And if you don't pay me $6,000, I'm going to post this photo to the internet. And so James, of course, didn't have $6,000. I don't know many 17-year-olds that have that amount of money. And James said, I don't believe you. And so to prove their point, the offender ultimately sent James's photo back to him. And not only did he send James the nude photo, he sent James a picture of his mother, and a picture of his father, and a picture of the kids that he ran track with. And James realized in that instance that this was a serious problem. And so, as I said, he spent that 20 hours trying to negotiate that money. And he got them down to $3,000, and then he got them down to $1,000. And 20 hours later, he got them down to a $100 gift card that he had in his wallet. And he scratched off the number and he sent it to these offenders. And unfortunately, that made the situation worse because that's really what they want when we talk about sextortion. It's not about the nude photo. It's about the leverage that these offenders have over their victims. And so once James paid a little bit of money, these offenders then said, well, that's great, but that's not enough. And you're going to continue to pay us money so that we don't post this photo on the internet. And unfortunately, less than 24 hours after this conversation began, James took his life in his parents' home before they even knew what was going on. And we have attributed at least 39 suicides to sextortion. Young men and women who thought that the only way to get out of this situation was to end their lives. And so again, we're really talking to kids about the dangers of taking photos. We're talking to kids about really thinking about what they're doing before they do it. Right? The tragedy of this situation is that 99% of these offenders are overseas, outside of the reach in some cases of U.S. law enforcement. It's become very difficult for us to identify who these individuals are, and for them it's a business. If they can get $10 or $15 from 20 or 30 victims a day, that is a lot of money overseas in these countries where these offenders operate, like the Ivory Coast, Nigeria, and the Philippines. Okay, so we're telling kids. James's parents, Tim and Tamia, are telling kids every single month and year that they've been doing this as part of their organization that you really need to think about the consequences. You need to think about kids like James Woods and the others that have unfortunately taken their own lives. And these are, James endured about 200 messages in that 24-hour period. And these are 4 of them. Okay? And you will see that these offenders have very little regard for human life. They want money. And it's kind of hard to see here, but what we're telling kids is you really need to look at the comments. You need to look at the language. Because it's hard to see here until I tell you this, but the punctuation is not great. The English is not great, right? So as these offenders operate, they're either using what little grasp of the English language they have, or they're having this translated from their native language into English so that they can send these messages to these victims. Because as I said, they portray themselves as U.S. males and females, teenagers, but they're anything but as they operate overseas there. So, but again, I mean, on top of that, you've got, where they're threatening, where they're saying this is what they're going to do, right? The 6,000, it's going to get the attention of the victim, and then on top of that, the photos that are then sent back to the victims in these cases. So what we're telling kids now is that, okay, you did something, you sent a photo, no amount of talking, no amount of pain is going to get that photo off the internet. There's nothing that we can say that's going to guarantee that this photo is not going to hit the internet. But because this is a business for these offenders, the best thing to do is just block that user. Okay? Cease that conversation. James thought he could talk his way out of this. James thought he could talk his offenders into sending that photo he took back to them and moving on. But what we're telling victims is that if you simply block that user, if you move on, they're going to just move on to the next victim, right? And it's going to mean that maybe your photo doesn't get released, but at the very least, you're not paying any money and you're not, hopefully going to harm yourself as well. I talked about cyber tips early on. We work very closely with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They run the cyber tip line that you see here. There is a 1-800 number that you can call, but the best way is through this online portal, report.cybertip.org. Okay? And this is where we get the 21,500 tips that we got last year. This is what generates the about 36 million tips every single year worldwide. It's a great platform in terms of reporting an online incident. All you know is an email, maybe a phone number, maybe a username. That doesn't necessarily mean there's something that we can do just from your tip. But obviously, if you're one of many, or if you start to establish a pattern with us with regards to your online incident, that may help law enforcement here or in other parts of the country. So a lot of good resources. Their website, the National Center's website is missingkids.com, but it will also take you to this cyber tip line report as well. Other resources that exist out there, as I said, parents oftentimes want some help in terms of removing content from the internet. So the National Center has a great little resource that's how to remove explicit content from various platforms. Because the unfortunate reality is that if you're finding material of your children or your grandchildren on Instagram, it may also reside on Kik or YouTube or TikTok or Snapchat. So unfortunately, it's really a go to each site and try and remove that material as well. The National Center has started a new initiative called the Take It Down Initiative, and this will push out material to these various platforms and ask these platforms to remove it or take it down. Kids can do this anonymously. It was designed so that kids would feel comfortable reporting material without the fear of being prosecuted or contacted by law enforcement. But it does require that the student or the child have the actual photo that they took. And a lot of times they're taking a photo and then they're deleting it. But how it works is you just hit the Get Started button, you send the photo to the National Center, and then they will, as I said, reach out to Meta as a partner. There are a few other companies that are involved as well, and they will say, if you find this on Facebook, if you find this on Instagram, take it down, remove it from circulation. So step in the right direction. There's a lot of resources as well. They provide some support to the submitter of the file as well. If that child needs some physical support or some support further on down the road, they can get it there as well. And then the irony is not lost on me that as an ICAC program, we have our own Facebook, we have our own X account, we have a website. But this is our main number to the task force office in Cleveland. We post a lot of good content on social media, internet safety tips, community outreach events. Because as I said at the very beginning, we really want to educate and kind of lessen that divide that exists between today's children and today's adults and caregivers. So thank you for being with me today. I certainly hope that you got something out of this. I know it's like drinking from a fire hose, but any little bit helps when it comes to learning a little bit about some of the problems that exist on the internet. So thank you.